It's good to see you. My name is Carl Turner. I am the rector of St. Thomas Church, Fifth Avenue in New York, and it's a delight to be with you today, albeit by this Zoom platform. Grateful thanks to Joe and the team from SEAT for setting up this fascinating discussion for our next hour and 20 minutes. It's lovely to have this very diverse panel before us today. It's good to have Scott Detra, who is at the Church of the Incarnation in Dallas. Scott, welcome. Jeremy Filsell is at St. Thomas Church, Fifth Avenue. And it's good to have you with us, Jeremy. Mike McCarthy joins us from the National Cathedral in Washington. Welcome, Mike. Robert McCormack joins us from St. Mark's, Philadelphia. Welcome, Robert. And Mother Erica Takacs, who is the rector of the Atonement in Chicago, but originally came from St. Mark's, where Robert is, where she founded or co-founded the chorister program there. So without further ado, we're going to start with a prayer. Let us pray. O God, whom saints and angels delight to worship in heaven, be ever present with your servants who seek through art and music to perfect the praises offered by your people on earth. And grant to them now such glimpses of your beauty, and make them worthy at length to behold it unveiled forevermore, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Well, of course, these have been exceptional times for all of us who are involved in the ministry of the church. And of course, the Episcopal Church prides itself, as do Anglican churches all around the world, in how music is a central part of our liturgical life, but also for many of us, it's a central part of our social life. It's how we build community. And of course, the choirs around the land and around the world have been silenced for a very long time this year. And we are still in this in-between stage. I come, as you hear, from the United Kingdom, and my last job was in a medieval cathedral. And that cathedral, like all the cathedrals in England, were silent for many, many months. And so today we're going to share some reflections of where we were, where we kind of are now in this in-between time, and where we hope to be in the future. So without further ado, we're going to go round the panel, and I'm going to invite each panelist, you have up to about 5 minutes to talk about where you were back in March and April, what happened to you, what's happening now, how you've responded, and if your program is starting up again, how have you managed that, and where do you hope to be going in this next year? So we'll go in alphabetical order, so let's go to Scott first.
Sure, thank you, Father. So as Father Turner mentioned, I'm at Church of the Incarnation in Dallas, and we just began a new chorister program. This is the beginning of our third year in the program. So it's very much in its infancy, if you will. What happened for us is that in the second week of March, everything in Dallas here shut down. We shut down the chorister program at that time. We did keep singing in church with, for webcasts, with a live, at least quartet. We've had at least 4 singers, professional singers, every week, every Sunday, since the church closed in March. So we've had 4, 8, or as many as 12. But for the chorister program, it went away completely in March. We did not meet again until September. None of the schools here in Dallas opened again before the end of the academic year. In May, June, they all stayed shut that entire time. And the schools here did reopen in August, September time. And at that time, we decided that we had to go back to some form of a chorister program, particularly in our case, with such a new program and very dedicated choristers and very dedicated parents. We did not want to lose the energy that we had built over the last 2 years. So it was very important to us to find a way to come back in September. The way we've done that is that we're unable to get the kids together as a group. We now have 18 choristers at the moment, and we felt that there was no way we could get them all together at the same time safely to rehearse. So what we've done is that we are seeing them in groups of 2. Happily, a majority of our choristers are actually siblings, so that works out very nicely for us. They come in groups of 2 for an hour once a week, in our case, and that hour is split in 2, where the first half hour they have a half hour of music theory instruction, classroom instruction in music theory to keep that going and current for them. And then the second half hour is singing. The warm-up is led by our voice teacher. And then after that, the next 20, 25 minutes, somewhere in there, is led by either myself or our associate music director, Graham Schultz. And in that time, in some ways, we've looked at this as a real opportunity as we're building our program. Unlike Mike or Jeremy, in the larger programs where, they would normally be singing 5, 6, 7 choral services a week, and therefore have a huge repertoire that they need to keep current. Of course, we'd love to be there someday, but we're not now. So we don't have a huge repertoire that we need to keep current. Of course, that would be the fear, if we did, how can we keep all this repertoire in the kids' heads through this difficult time? We don't have that problem. So we've looked at sort of the silver lining of all of this is that we can see the kids in small groups, 2 at a time, and give a more personal instruction, both musically, as I said, theory, vocally, and it is, of course, perhaps the most important element to the chorister program is Christian formation. So we can offer that in the hour that we have with each of them each week. Not so much in the music theory half hour, but in the singing half hour, we're doing a lot out of the hymnal, which one of my colleagues once said to me, the best theory book I have is the hymnal. And I thought, boy, isn't that smart? That's exactly right. And can be used in so many ways. So we're doing a lot out of the hymnal and a little bit with some of the repertoire that we did have. It's working very well for us for now. My fear, of course, is that how long will this go on? We do want to get them back into a group singing together, and are beginning to think about ways that we might do that in the future. But for now, that's how we've approached this situation, and it's working very well for us.
Thank you, Scott. Could you say something about the rules that you have in your diocese as opposed to the state?
Sure. So here in the Diocese of Dallas, we are still under a rule of no congregational singing. Choral singing is allowed, and having returned to some in-person worship about 4 weeks ago, I think it was, for the in-person services, the choir will sing anthems, but there are no hymns. The ordinary of the Mass is spoken by everyone. And for our, currently we have one service that is webcast only. And for that, we do have hymns. We do sing the Mass ordinary and so forth, with everything that we would normally sing in church. So I do have to say that the one with congregation is first at 9 o'clock, and the one without congregation is second at 11:15. And it does feel very strange at 11:15 when there's no one there, after having had people there earlier in the morning, to suddenly be singing hymns with no one else there in the pews. But it's just one of those strange things that we're all dealing with and getting used to.
Thank you very much, Scott. Jeremy, you have a different experience in that St. Thomas has a residential choir school which had to close back in March. We'd like to start with where we were, where we are at the moment, where we hope to be.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. It's glad to hear that there's a silver lining to your cloud, Scott, that you've got some kids back, which is fantastic. We have a slightly unusual situation. I think we suffered initially because of the New York hotspot, COVID hotspot, that saw infections and thus deaths rise exponentially early on. So I think the strictures under which we've had to work have been pretty, pretty restrictive. And we're still working with that since the directives we have date back to the middle of June. And nothing has changed in that time. Maybe that explains why the infection rate is low in New York. There must be something to do with that. But it's meant that we've had to be kind of creative. Of course, we, like you, in the second week of March, were singing merrily on a Thursday afternoon evensong, and the following Saturday, all the kids went home, and that was it, done, dusted. And of course, the sad thing is that there are certain boys who were singing treble then who are not singing treble now. So they've missed out on, realizing that was their last service, singing treble and graduation and all those things that go with the school scenario that we have here, which is a source of sadness. Like everybody else, we went to Zoom schooling, tried in my initial few weeks to hold some kind of choral ensemble meeting. That proved to be a challenge in no uncertain terms. So gave that one up and did a lot of stuff that was based on liturgy and theory. And I had the kids writing chants and so on, and being creative in that way, doing some listening, of course. But that was kind of limping along week by week with the rest of the school, working out an academic curriculum as we went along, and simply adapting to what was in front of us. Fairly early on in the summer, there emerged this possibility of using the camp where the kids go at the end of the summer term every year, and have done for 50 plus years. Essentially an outdoor Episcopal camp at Ivoryton, Connecticut, which has a lot of enclosed spaces, but is set in thousands of acres of woodland. This was a mammoth task, particularly for our school staff, to engineer, to simply shift the whole school and to convince parents of the veracity of the intention and the safety of their children within that environment. So it was developed quite early on in the summer to go and do this for 6 weeks initially and see where we were. So the kids all convened up in Connecticut in early September, mid-September. And for 2 weeks, we did all the safety protocol, mask wearing and social distancing, and rehearsing in outdoors and in spaces where there was natural ventilation and so on. And in that time had 2 COVID tests that established that everybody, faculty, music staff and kids, were all negative. At that point, we were deemed to be a pod and therefore could behave and act normally, which is what we did. So losing the masks, the choir was able to sing, the boys were able to sing together, the faculty were able to interact together, and there was free movement within the camp. We were lucky enough to use what has been set up as a kind of wedding banquet hall as a space for both rehearsals and services. We were very lucky. Steinway's lent us 2 fantastic pianos for the kids to learn on, for us to direct rehearsals from. Viscount gave us an organ, all this sort of thing. Little bits and pieces came together to enable us to have this unique window onto the reality that was. I came back after 4 weeks of doing that last week, and the kids are there till this coming Sunday, when they will go home. And the decision has now been made to go back to online schooling. The directives for New York have not changed, and we're still under the need to have 12-foot distance with masks to sing. When we initially locked down, we had no singing in church whatsoever. We're lucky that, of course, we have some organs that carry liturgy if they're allowed to do so. So we had organ-led masses. And eventually we added in a cantor. So one of the gents came in to sing a plain chant psalm and an aria or whatever at offertory. So that was a tiny dipping of the toe in the water. Literally last week, we ventured to having a sextet of gentlemen. So sang some fairly undemanding polyphony last week, all 12-foot distance. So, you know, I had people 36 feet away from me. Nobody could hear each other, and nobody could see each other's mouths. So it was an interesting experiment in ensemble singing, it has to be said. But we can get away with that with the gents. We can't get away with that with the kids. So where we are through Christmas as we stand is that the boys are at home and online schooling with no choral component. And here at church, we will be working through Christmas with a sextet of gentlemen. That's as we are presently. We'll see where we go from January onwards. My current energy is to try and find some nuanced directive, perhaps some epidemiological advice that allows for nuances. At the moment, the New York directive on singing covers everything from Christian amplified rock groups to 150 voice choral societies, amateur professional choirs, children's choirs. It's just one blanket directive, which does not reflect the nuance of certain institutions. With a boys' choir, of course, voices don't stop breaking during pandemic times. So we literally, in the last few weeks up in Connecticut, I realized that 4 boys who were quite happily singing off the top of the stave in March are now not, and are in their kind of swan song mode. Recruitment, of course, for us is very challenging in a boarding school environment. So we're not replenishing at the bottom of the choir what we lose at the top. So very quickly, a choir like St. Thomas becomes remarkably fragile. Unless we can find a way of doing the kind of thing that you're doing, Scott, and have boys back for short periods in cohorts, existing as a quasi-pod. It all depends on the level of risk with which we're prepared to behave. And of course, it's somewhat galling when you look across the Atlantic and we see how many choirs, cathedrals and churches have gone back with safety mitigation in place, but we're not able to do that here. So part of my energy is trying to find a way whereby we can get some directive that allows us to do some singing. Otherwise, the repertoire aspects that you talked about, Scott, are very, very easily lost. There's no collective memory of all this repertoire. And the skill set, which we noticed was lost when we were up in Connecticut, it took 4 to 5 weeks for that skill set and that rate of learning and concentration and so on to return. All that energy gets dissipated now, sadly. So it was a lovely window, beautiful window, but somehow we have to find a way of New York allowing some kind of creativity with our thinking and our safety protocols to get us back within the next 6 months. Otherwise, we lose a lot, of course.
Thank you, Jeremy. That's really helpful. Mike.
Yeah, the cathedral has there are a couple of challenges, one challenge, one consideration. The challenge is that to run the institution it's a big ship, and as we had to shut down, so tourism and all our income sources evaporated, other than donors. So we've had to furlough and lay off a huge number of people. So one of the consequences of that is as soon as things turn, we can't necessarily open the doors and rush back in because we can't start it. So we have a sort of catch-22 situation, or not, just a little bit of that. So we're going to have to be very sort of strategic about how we open up. Our restrictions are that we are currently in what they're calling phase 2, but that's looking a little fragile right now, where we can gather up to 100 people in one place. So we have elected not to open because of the staffing issues of managing 100 people to come in, cleaning, and all those things that we have to do. When we were very fortunate that whilst we've always been webcasting for some years, we upgraded our system last summer just because it was time to. And it has allowed us an amazing ability to webcast from the cathedral in a fairly sophisticated way for churches. And that was a significant sort of eye-opener for us, that in some respects, I think because of who we are, there's a sense of people coming to the cathedral for worship from across the country. That was always sort of the case, but we've noticed that the online congregation, which is brand new, is many in number. And we also know that when we open up, we are not now shutting down that part of what we do as a liturgical institution. We also have, as part of our music program, two very diverse offerings. The Anglican tradition, the boy choristers, we have the girl choristers as well, very much as you would find in St. Thomas or other churches with colleagues here. But we also have contemporary worship as well, which is popular. And what we have right now on a Sunday morning is we have one rule, which is we have no more than 10 people on the liturgical platform. Our space determines that that's the maximum that we feel comfortable having. So we have one organist, one classical singer, our contemporary music pianist, and a singer from there. So we are offering very much blended worship. The chorister program is going. One of our challenges is that unlike a boarding school where we would necessarily have control over the students' schedules or an after-school activity, ours is curriculum-based. So we are weaved into the boy and girls' schedules at the school, and these are negotiated, and it's not regular. It sort of revolves all over the place. And when there's no COVID, it's a challenge. With COVID, each institution has created its own way of dealing with COVID, and we are sort of a weave between about 5 different sort of plans between 3 different schools. And it's a challenge. So we can't actually, if we elected to, get any one group together at the same time by virtue of their academic schedule. There is some fairly stringent rules and regulations on the close. The cathedral close has 4 institutions: the cathedral, a boys' school, a girls' school, and an elementary school, all of which have to work in some form of tandem regards consistency of health. So we are sort of beholden a little bit more onto the schools with that. We are running by Zoom our classes. So we've seen the boys and girls on probably an everyday basis or every other day right now, depending on the separate schools and their COVID schedules. Much of our time, very little of it is doing choral music. We are not trying to run choir rehearsals. It's impossible. And it's not only is it impossible, as much as you try, the kids themselves are it's not a real experience for them. So it's almost more painful to try and emulate that than it is to actually say, let's not do that. And in fact, we had that conversation where we said after 6 weeks of trying this, guess what? We're not going to do this anymore. And the youngest boy of 8 to the oldest girl of 18 expressed their joy in their various different sort of dynamics there. But it was clearly, and to their credit, and it's probably happening everywhere else as well, the acceptance of where we are, and it's no one's fault, and everyone's fault, but we've got to just make sure we keep moving, and that we have to make, whatever we do, it has to be engaging, and it has to be stimulating, and somewhere when there, it has to be fun. And some of that is, from our perspective, actually just maintaining a sense of community, maintaining a sense of fun. Yeah, sometimes we will just go on Zoom for half an hour and just share stories and have a bit of fun. When something comes up, we're making some silly videos. So it's all a sense of trying to keep a community with a sense of fun around a purpose of singing to the glory of God, which they get but they can't do. But somehow reminding them of the very human aspects of working as a team, of being together and having a shared purpose, regardless of the very many different sort of styles of family and of child you get. That right now is what we are really focusing on. Interestingly, each of our choristers gets a piano lesson and a singing lesson a week. We have found by Zoom, and maybe this is because the students are also within a home, singing lessons and piano lessons have taken off, and they are doing so much better by Zoom than they were in person when they were juggling school schedules and sports and running all over the place. So it's quite interesting that that is a silver lining for us. And I think part of trying to deal with difficulty of this situation is also just taking a breath to make sure you're looking at the opportunities that are coming out of this very tragic situation, because they are going to inform the opportunities both within, I think, our programs, but how our programs can actually reach out beyond the walls, because that's what we've had to do with our own communities. So I think as we look at that, that's something I'm sort of curious about. Yeah, we are trying our best, but there is no choral singing. For Christmas and stuff like that, we are creating a little bit of virtual choir stuff, but that's sort of run its course, I think. But we are pre-recording our Christmas offerings in not necessarily as as live situation, but we're actually going to cut these together so you can take your lessons and carols from a small chapel that you would never be in for lessons and carols because people couldn't see it, but you can bring the storytelling of the building, and we all have fantastic buildings to be able to do that as a way of engaging with our sort of worshiping communities and the communities sort of that we're starting to acquire, as to just feeling a sense of home, which again I think is something which comes to all of us as we devote our lives to that, and the kids that follow that. We feel very much that the cathedral and other churches are part of that sense of belonging.
Thank you very much, Mike. Mike, the schools that the girl and the boy choristers attend, are they closed at the moment, or are in person, or are they remote learning?
That's a very, very straightforward question with a very, very complicated answer.
Oh.
Yes, the elementary school opened up at the beginning of the year, but is about to close down as we see numbers rise. The two upper schools are going to cohort situations this week and starting next week. So we'll actually start to see the kids. I actually think one of the strategies here, which may be interesting, is that they want to try and get the kids back for a while, at least before we maybe have to close down again. So there was a little bit like Jeremy, actually having got the community together. It was a tremendously valuable thing to see them through what looks like to be another potentially 10 to 12 months of unnormal singing behavior. So I commend St. Thomas's for doing that, because again, it is a very fragile piece, and we can talk about recruiting at some point later on, but recruiting is a real challenge right now, especially for boys' choirs.
Thank you, Mike. That's a nice segue into Robert at St. Mark's.
Thank you, Father, and it's good to be with you all today. And I think that my experience and our experience here at St. Mark's in Philadelphia no doubt has a lot of similarities to what we've heard and what many of those of you joining in have found. I mean, we made the decision to basically shut everything down within the span of 24 hours as circumstances were changing, which I know is the case in countless places. And it was very strange to sort of, go one day from sort of, well, we're going about our usual thing, to this closed for public worship and no in-person activities. So our music program here has sort of two components. Adult singers, we have 9 professionals, and then about 10 volunteer singers. And then we have boy and girl choristers, which is a program that Mother Takis helped to found when she was here now about 7 or so years ago. So we had to figure out what to do about all that. Now, when we close for public worship, there's a small resident community here. They're full-time clergy, and then they're ministry residents who live on the premises. And they kept the daily office and daily mass going. And immediately, like many churches, we were thrust into webcasting. We've been talking about, getting around to webcasting, video webcasting, maybe eventually, but, not now. Well, the next Sunday we were doing a rudimentary webcast. So, and now at the moment we have a permanent installation going in for, some decent, high quality equipment. So we've realized that's here to stay. But I kept playing the organ. We had no choral singers. We kept singing the liturgy with whoever was there chanting and singing. And it was very strange, of course, to be at the organ with an empty, darkened nave, and really, unsettling. We sort of got used to it, and I was grateful to be able to do that, if nothing else. And it was clear that it was meeting a pastoral need from parishioners who live locally and friends of the parish from further away. So, just knowing that there was a community on the other side of a screen, it's not nearly like having people in the pews, but it's better than nothing. So as we started to move to a different phase in the early summer, we were allowed to have one cantor from the choir come and sing, and the cantors came and began singing the plain song propers and an anthem at communion or what have you. We kept chanting the liturgy. Then when we opened for limited public worship, the diocese does not allow congregational singing, as is the case many other places. But we decided that we still wanted to keep singing the liturgy. And I know this sounds strange and almost ridiculous, but the diocesan guidelines say that the congregation may hum. And that really is just not, it sounds terrible, but I've realized it may be better than nothing. So we've had a cantor and now a quartet who are sort of leading the singing on behalf of the congregation. We did not initially go to a quartet or more than one singer because the diocesan guidelines permitted singers, they had to be 27 feet apart from each other.
Did you say 27?
27 feet apart. Now, we found a way to make that work. When we tried it one Sunday, I did nothing of any great musical sophistication, and it worked okay, but as a regular practice, I don't think so. And I and some other colleagues were in communication and dialogue with the bishop and some of his staff, who've really been terrific, and the Diocese of Pennsylvania, in light of some of the recent research about singing, masks, distancing, circulation. And so they revised their guidelines. And I think they're thoughtful and they're cautious, but not ridiculous. They're workable. So we're now having a professional quartet for Sunday high masses, singing in ordinary, singing plain song propers. They can sing masked 10 feet from each other, which is still challenging. But I'm thankful to have it. Now, as for our children, I kept going virtually by Zoom all of last spring. And it was sort of, making it up as we went along. Gradually, I got better at it. And I'll tell you just in a moment as I finish up what we're doing now. But it was important for them to stay together. And we have about 23, 24 choristers, ages 7 and up, and almost to a person, they've all stayed engaged. We had a few boys who aged out, whose voices were changing. That's, of course, just simply the way it is. But I've not, with almost to a person, I've not really lost anyone. And I made a real effort to try to stay in touch, to keep them gathering in some way. And so now, as we are here in October, we have, of course, that adult component. And I have our boys and girls gathering up to 4 times a week, virtually. Now, I am trying to run a sort of Zoom rehearsal. A lot of it's reinforcing vocal hygiene, doing warm-ups, asking individual choristers to sing. And then we have begun doing one virtual service per month. And we recently did a choral evensong, which had some pre-recorded components by adult singers and some multi-track choir singers. Now, I know that's, we're all starting to roll our eyes at all the videos of everybody in their little bubbles singing. But for us, it's been a way to keep both children and volunteer adults engaged and involved. And our assistant organist and choir master, who is not only a wonderful musician, Brian Dunwald, but a technical whiz, has put all this together, and he's done an amazing job. So we're now working on one for November. We'll do something similar for our Advent Carol service. And again, it's not the most musically satisfying medium, but I've been pleased that they've come across and come off and been as well received as they are. And so I'm grateful to have that if we can't do any other in-person singing with children. And finally, we are now able to have in-person rehearsals for children 13 and older. And I have a pretty young group this year on average, in part due to having several boys age out. So I have a small group of right now of girls who are coming once a week, and they can sing for only 30 minutes at a time. And so we're doing one in-person time a week, and I think that's been fruitful for them. It's been satisfying for me to be able to have that time to work with them. And I think that basically sums up where we are now.
Thank you. Fascinating, Robert. We'll come back to talk about some of the, particularly those of you who have chorister programs drawn from many schools that are meeting after school. I think we ought to come back to Scott and Robert on this one. But Erica, we just heard how draconian the measures are in Pennsylvania. How are they in Chicago?
Well, Chicago, I'm the rector of the Church of the Atonement, which is in Edgewater, which is a neighborhood in Chicago, but we are in the city. And so our policies have been governed by not only the governor, but also the mayor. And then our diocesan policies have been really in lockstep with those guidelines. The decisions that were made about worship in Chicago in our diocese were very, and they still are quite strict. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that they're quite conservative in what's allowed for us. We had the same experience that you all did. One Sunday it was like, we're using hand sanitizer now. And the next Sunday it was like, oh, we're closing in March. And when we closed, what was different about the Diocese of Chicago than many other dioceses is that we were not allowed to be in our churches. So our bishop said that our churches were closed. We weren't allowed to be in them, to use them as an office, and we weren't allowed to use the worship space because I think I'm representing him well when I say that I think he did this in a sense of solidarity with the rest of the city and the state, which were under a stay-at-home order, and so he wanted us to literally stay at home. So our first decisions about worship then were, everything for us has been virtual. There was no organ playing until mid-June for us at all, because we weren't allowed to be in the church. So we immediately went to, we were saying liturgy of the word instead of mass, because I didn't have an altar and I was by myself. And so we didn't say mass. And my organist, who lives two floors below me, was playing his piano, and that kind of virtual worship allowed us to do more musically than we can do now when we went back into the church, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we had lots of singing on Zoom. We had lots of piano. We kept doing evensong. We have opted here to keep our liturgies as live as possible. So we haven't done a lot of pre-recording. We will likely, as we look to things like Advent lessons and carols and Christmas Eve. But again, Robert, like you said about Brian, our choir director has, our organist, choir master, has been in charge of programming music. Our assistant, so the choir director, Christopher Windle, it just happens to be one of these people who knows how to do things on a computer that I don't know how to do. So almost immediately we started doing virtual choir things. And the reason for that, although as you said, Michael, it's far from ideal, people recording into their headphones. The reason for that was that we really wanted to keep the choir in front of the congregation, and it has actually allowed the congregation to get to know the choir a little bit better. They can see them a little better than they even can when they're live together in church. And also because we really wanted to keep paying our singers and keep them employed because we knew what a shock to the system this was for them. And we were blessedly in the situation where we could do that. So we were, worshiping from the living room for a long time. At the beginning of June, things started to get better here so that we were able to move back into our churches. Like many of you, I'm sure we had to come up with guidelines for how we would have corporate worship. At first, we just moved back into the church so that we could at least have mass at an altar with the organ. And now we have an in-person service as well, which is a low mass. The rules, though, have continued to stay pretty strict. So in the Diocese of Chicago, there is no in-person singing allowed at all in church. So no choirs, no congregational singing, no chanting, no cantor, no nothing. And, you know, we have to wear our masks all the time. We can't take them off to preach or celebrate. So what it has meant is that so for our virtual worship, we're sort of in the space so that people can experience mass, and we can have mass for the people that are there to read and to serve as an intercessor. We have people singing at home. We have an organ playing hymns, but those of us that are there can't sing, which is a very strange sensation to hear one of your favorite hymns kind of rip in, and you're standing there just trying really hard not to sing. And I will say, Robert, humming would be miraculous. If I could hum, I would love it, because right now I'm just biting my tongue. There's certain hymns that I've told my organist choir master we cannot have until I can sing again, because I would just cry to not be able to sing General Seminary or something like that. But our choir has continued to, our professional choir has continued to record anthems and even mass settings. And our volunteer choir has continued to do evensong. And all of that's virtual or pre-recorded using an app. And we've continued to have hymns every week for our congregants to sing at home for those people that are still coming just to the virtual mass. Our in-person worship is all spoken. And we've chosen for now to keep those two things separate because it was just easier to have. I think, Scott, you said you have like a 9 o'clock service, and then 11 o'clock it sort of turns into a studio. That's a little bit what ours feels like. It's a 9 o'clock in-person service, and then there are cords running all over the place so that at 11:15 or 11 o'clock, it can be a kind of a studio. One thing that Father Turner mentioned at the beginning is that we do not have a chorister program at Atonement. I will say. And so one of the things that I did early on at St. Mark's when we were building up to beginning a chorister program was to begin to incorporate more music into our Christian formation for kids. So last year, which was my first full summer there, we had our first sort of summer arts camp. It's kind of a vacation music school, which incorporated all kinds of storytelling and prayer and play and crafts, but also a significant amount of music and singing. So this year, we decided that we very much wanted to do that again, and we actually partnered with St. James Cathedral here in Chicago to be able to offer a virtual summer arts camp, which we did, which involved some singing from home for the kids, of course on mute, which is sad. But I did hear from parents that that was the part of the camp that the kids liked the best, actually, was the singing and being able to hear other people sing. So we in Chicago, of course, our schools closed right away and went online. They're still online, and probably will be for the rest of the year. And so I would say that in my congregation, the Zoom fatigue for families and for kids is very, very real. I actually spoke with Stephen Buzard before this panel just to see what he's doing at the cathedral, because he, like Scott, has started an RSCM program there relatively recently. And so it's very new, and he's working very hard to sustain it. They did a lot of Zoom rehearsal in the spring, and he's chosen not to do Zoom rehearsals now. They are getting together in person, which they can do for music theory and formation, but they're doing Zoom lessons online, just individual singing lessons. So our families, for example, loved the summer arts camp, but are much more interested in the possibility of getting together for just time to spend together. Michael, as you said, just an opportunity to sort of hang out and tell their stories. We thought about offering some more musical programming for kids and families via Zoom or some other online medium. And they just said, our kids just really don't want it. They don't really want to do it. Because they're doing it all day, every day. They've been doing it all day, every day for a long time, and it looks like they're going to be doing it that way for the foreseeable future. So, for the future here at Atonement in our diocese, we're of course also in a bishop search. So things are exciting here. Our bishop was supposed to have been retired by now, but he decided, because he's a kind and good and holy man, to stay as our process got pushed back. We'll be electing a new bishop in December, and the bishop has decided to stay until the end of the year. Every time that we get together as a group of clergy and lay leaders in the diocese, the question of singing comes up, and every time we do, the answer is not yet. So I don't anticipate that will change soon for us. So we're making plans to make sure that we can have music that our singers, our professional amateur singers, can contribute what they can to contribute to our liturgies, especially around Advent and Christmas, knowing that that's likely not going to be able to happen in person. So we've planned everything for the end of the year with as much virtual singing as we can muster. So so that's where we are, and that's where we're hoping to go in the future. But I've been really grateful for the flexibility of my and perseverance of my music staff, the music staff that I'm blessed to work with, in just trying new things and saying, okay, well, we'll do it this way because we know how important music is to this congregation. And we want to make sure that is something that is continued to be offered here. So
thank you very much.
That's Atonement. Sure.
Thank you, Erica. That got me thinking. I mean, we have two churches, the Cathedral and St. Thomas, with, I know you have girls and boys, Mike, but nevertheless, they're one group from a school, even though the schools are different in form. But Robert and Scott, you have a very diverse group of kids. I'm asking all of you, I don't know who wants to answer this first, but thinking of what Erica was just saying, Mother Takacs was saying that actually everyone's getting a bit zoomed out, and bearing in mind that we're probably going to be with restrictions well into the spring before any vaccination program, if it happens. Could actually that play to our advantage? Could we find that people actually, kids, are desperate to be back, that maybe next fall that there's actually a resurgence and it's going to be easier to recruit? And is there a difference between the kind of choirs that Mike and Jeremy run and Scott and Robert run? And it'd be interesting afterwards if Erica had a comment about that, because you were smiling just then. But I don't know. Scott, you've been most patient listening. Do you want to say anything?
Sure, I'll say that having not done anything from March till the end of the school year in our case, unlike some others here on the panel, when we did come back to some in-person in small groups in September, the kids were thrilled to be back. In most of those cases, they were back with their sibling, as I mentioned before. We're doing groups of 2, and a majority of our choristers are siblings. So, but just being back here and singing and getting back to the chorister program was a source of great joy for them. And their performance in the time that we have them for was just, in a lot of cases, way over and above what we had before when they were in a larger group.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, we certainly found that in Connecticut, that there was the initial burst of enthusiasm for being back to doing what our kids did on a day-by-day basis. That was palpable. You know, it was interesting because, of course, they are used to a certain intensity of work rate, that it took quite a few weeks for them to lock back into that intensity. We didn't really hold back on the expectation and said, right, this is it. You know, you've got 6 weeks now to get back on this horse, and we're going to do it, and we're not going to do it gently. And they responded. They did respond. And I think it took 4 to 5 weeks. The great shame for us is that it was just this snapshot in time, and it's not something we can take momentum from going forward. and it probably makes the next period of lockdown rather, more painful in some ways, because we can't continue anything of that for us. But it was nice while it lasted. It was lovely.
Robert?
I would just say that, if I may, that, I know the Zoom fatigue is real. And when we started off doing this, I thought, well, rehearsals are, an hour and 15 minutes. Well, my Zoom rehearsals have to be an hour and 15 minutes too. And it became clear, as I saw eyeballs and children pretending to have technical difficulties, just not working. I also learned very quickly that I could take away their ability to change their names. Shorter, and I try to keep it sort of upbeat and not do the same thing for too long. And I've also portrayed staying committed this way virtually. I said, I sort of played, asked their sympathy, or showed my sympathy. I know you're doing this for school, virtually all of you, and I know it's terrible. We're doing this so that you will be ready when you come back, that it won't feel strange, as strange, that you'll be prepared. You have to be prepared to jump right back in as if you never missed a day. Now, who knows? So I think they will be enthusiastic. And I would also note that I've been really gratified and thankful to see that a number of younger choristers have actually improved over this time. I never would have expected that was possible. So that's been a small source of, something to be thankful for. So
yeah,
I think they will be more enthusiastic when we can get back to something like normal.
Fascinating.
Yes, and to bear in mind maybe that the kids who are joining the program for this last year and the coming year it'll be like sort of Liberation Day when they come back, because they've never done a program in a space where they've experienced the very nature, the very essence of the program, which is sort of why I think the notion of reboot is a scare. I think that's a word we should try and not use, rather than just sort of grow back. There's a sense of something is coming to an end. I think that's, if we lose sort of airspeed on this, we're sort of in danger. So I like the idea of keeping a sense of just the day is coming.
Erica, does it inspire you to prepare for a chorister program to begin in a year's time?
Oh, it does. I think the palpable longing for music making is inspiring, and I think you're absolutely right that when people do have the capacity to join together, and when our kids have the capacity to sing these songs that they've learned on Zoom together, they have no idea how much fun they're in for, and it makes me think of, I can't remember the name of the singer now, but the singer who was a soprano, she premiered a lot of Barber's works. I can't think of her name. Starts with an E, I think. Anyway, she wrote a biography where she talked about, at one point she went to Denver to premiere an opera to sing, and she was singing, and it was hard at first because of the altitude, and then she got accustomed to it and it was fine. And then she said, then she came back to the East Coast and she felt like a genius. She could sing for 12 days and not take a breath because she'd prepared in this way. And I think about that all the time when I hear about your singers singing from 30 feet apart or 10 feet apart, and not being able to hear. And especially for a child to be, singing, learning a part 2 by 2 or with a small group of kids that are of a certain age. And then suddenly to be in that experience that we all know and love of like being held by the music in that way. I think we're going to have to do some rebuilding, but I think we're going to have a lot of help just by the experience that is, and the transformation that we all know that can affect in people's lives.
How much do you think, we all know that singing in an ensemble is more than a means to an end, but how much is the social aspect of actually being close together, physically close together? This morning, they had an interview on the BBC and I can't remember who it was now being interviewed, and he was talking about how the prom concerts went ahead in these venues, particularly the Albert Hall, designed for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in their audience, you know, empty. But orchestra, the BBC Symphony Orchestra had to be pared down, and every instrumentalist had to be, I think it was 2 meters, about 12 feet apart. And this interviewer saying, you know, and it made this symphony they were playing sound like chamber music. I'm talking about the character being changed. Well, we know about the character of music, but what do you think we've been losing in terms of the social nature, the you know, just being together? What does singing do for your churches?
Well, you can answer that one, Father, for us.
You know what I think. Come on, Robert. Well, I mean, what are we losing at the moment during this long period of restriction and lockdown? Not just musically, but what else are we losing, do you think?
Well, we certainly are losing a really valuable social aspect, and you know, I fear that we could be losing some of the formation aspect too, and you know, especially children not routinely doing the liturgy or participating in the liturgy and being expected to lead the liturgy. So, you know, I'm not entirely sure how we compensate for that other than try to keep talking about it. But I also, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but I guess after all, that is my occupation. But this is, I think, related. There was so much concern about singing that I was I understood the concern and I shared the concern. I was very unhappy that I felt like singing was being portrayed as sort of the ultimately dangerous act. And I believe that singing is one of the most life-giving things that human beings can do. So I've been really trying to reinforce that this is what we do. We're sort of doing it a different way now, but you have to hold on to the hope. Our rector, Father Sean Mullen, preached a sermon on Monday, Thursday. I remember all his sermons very well, of course. You know, I take notes usually about, you know, you belong here, and the act of remembering, you know, this is where you belong, to the congregation listening from home. And I thought it was very powerful. And I feel the same way about the choir. I'm trying to remind them that they belong in the stalls, they belong in procession, and that they will be there again. So I don't know, maybe I've not offered anything helpful there, but we're missing it. I'm just holding on to the hope that we will get it back if we continue to value it.
Yes.
And fight for it.
Anyone else want to add anything?
I think, yeah, well, I mean, the social aspect is hugely important. And I think a lot of the dynamic that we experienced with the kids being up in Connecticut was because of the social as much as the musical. And of course, you know, that's why it took 4 to 5 weeks for us to be back to some sort of semblance of where we were when we locked down in March, because they were standing next to each other. There was this kind of osmosis going on that happens in all choirs, and it's that you cannot replicate online. And that is the social and the musical are deeply interwound. And that's what's really challenging for all of us at the moment, is to find that symbiosis between those elements, both of which we've lost in spades through this. Of course, for us personally, you know, just having boys, the voices break, and you know, we will get back in some form, but what will we have? Half a choir by the time we get back, and can we recruit? Those are the challenges of a boys choir, because there's a finite amount of time for which they sing, and we don't have girls at the present to prop us up. So it makes a boys choir, of course, very fragile in these times, unless we can do something to try and restore that kind of musical activity in some way, sooner rather than later. That's our challenge. But
Mike, do you think, is that something that concerns you at the cathedral? as thinking about the boys' tradition as opposed to the girls.
Yeah, I mean that is one of our big challenges. Is just Jeremy was saying that he's sort of lost 4 or 5 boys since March, and we are right now losing. We have 4 or 5 boys whose voices have passed, and they were at the lead of the program, and we actually had a very good year of boys who were showing and building the leadership, as Jeremy says, by osmosis, that is so instructive. And all that experience, all of that investment of theirs and ours, has not really had a chance to sort of, as it were, seep through the system as the way it works. So I think that's a real challenge to make sure that we keep the osmosis piece, which just as hard as I try in Zoom, I just can't sort of push enough of this stuff through the cracks in the screen, sadly. So it's a challenge there. I think one other little thing to say is, I think we are very focused on the health of our choirs and the health of our program, but I think something that is very important, I think, to our kids and probably to any kid that sings in a choir like this, is that they're singing for the greater glory of God, but they are so inspired by the people who attend church, for whom our work is focused on and with. And I think the absence of our presence amongst the worshipping community, of course, an online community you can't see, you have no relationship with other than chats and emails. But it's a very important piece of nourishment, and it's not ego stroking, it's a sense of purpose, and it's a sense of will that allows our programs to never forget that this is important stuff. This is really important, life-changing work. And that's not a boast, it's a responsibility that you have to embrace and understand that it's really important right now. So I would we haven't talked about the congregation very much, or the worshiping community, because we're such an important part of sustaining that, and will be such an important part of inspiring that when we come together again.
That's fascinating, Mike. I think about 20 years ago, the archbishops in England had a commission. I don't know if you remember this, Jeremy, but they had a commission on church music. And there's a great section on cathedrals, obviously. But the one thing I think a lot of us took out of that is a huge report, and the RSCM was heavily involved in that. But the one thing that came out of it was, these are not children who are performing. The choristers are not performers. We are not being entertained by children. The children are ministers. And, I've often said this, when you're talking to prospective chorister parents, certainly I used to say this when I used to recruit for the cathedral I worked for in England, there are great sports academies in Great Britain, and you can go and, go into the sports academy of Manchester United, but you will never play football with any of the squad of Manchester United. You can go and play in a rugby team, or any number of places, even science academies. You're not going to rub shoulders with great physicists. But apart from the Royal Ballet School, certainly the cathedral choir schools of England had children performing, singing on the same level as professional adults, and that is unique across the world. And so therefore, I think what Mike says is so important, that going back to this report I started with, that children are ministers. They should be seen as equals in the Christian community, which takes us back to Jesus himself taking a child and saying, right, be like this. How much do we need to rebuild that after COVID? Or how much will COVID reinforce the idea of children and choristers being ministers to the community? Erica?
Well, I don't know if I have an answer to that. That's a tricky question to ask. My prayer is with you that, a tricky question to answer, I should say. My prayer is with you that the absence of the presence of singers, the absence of the presence of choirs, will create such a joy when they are available again, that we will have to work, of course, to rebuild the programs. We'll have to rebuild all kinds of things about congregations, but that it will be attractive in its own right. And there is, if we're praying that this, if we're praying and also proclaiming that God can transform this situation, and that God can actually bring blessings out of this situation, my prayer is that one of them is that we value those. We realize how important it is to value those who are least powerful in our own community. Of course, this is what Jesus was talking about when he put the little child in front of all the disciples. And also to say that those children not only can perform at the same level as professionals, but that, as my former colleague, Father Sean Mullen, always says, they can do something that adults can't do. They can actually make a sound that adults can replicate, but that adults have to sort of make themselves do, whereas that happens for children in a particular way. And they're valued and they're needed. And that's something that we need to keep saying to congregations everywhere, is that you are essential to the mission of God. And if we can say that about children in their ministry in music in the church, that could be a powerful tool for evangelism. You're needed. We need you. We cannot do it without you.
Jeremy, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, the phone rang. I was just going to say that they do that work instinctively for such a short time in their lives, girls and boys. That offering is such a short-lived thing, and it goes back to what Robert was talking about Christian formation and so much that we lose within that. That's part of it as well. And that's why I think we have to be within the strictures that we have. We have to try and be as creative as we can to try and get these programs back on board. I'm constantly aware that we've been away 6-7 months, and it's been a period that's been productive for us personally in some ways. I've certainly done some composing and reading that I wouldn't otherwise have done. But for a 10 or 11 or 12-year-old, that 6 months is a significant portion of their life. It's a significant portion of their experience at that age, which they can't replicate, which we can't give them back. And if this goes on for a year or 18 months, I mean, what we potentially lose with youngsters is huge. And it'll put us on a knife edge as to whether we can really rebuild these programs in the same way. The year will put us four years back if we're not careful. So I think we have to try and be, it's great to hear that Scott's able to get some of the kids back in person-to-person form, because even in 2s and 3s and small cohorts, that is of immense value. And if we can do that, and if we can find a way of engineering that situation, however small, from small acorns do great oak trees grow. And if at this time we can do that, then I think what you've done, Scott, in Dallas is a cause for optimism.
And of course, in this panel, of course, we've heard how different each state and each city is looking after things, and the rules are different. And in some cases, the rules have not changed for a long time. And to reflect something Jeremy said earlier, we look over the Atlantic and we see that the rules are constantly changing. Now, in some respects, that one of the criticisms of Britain at the moment is they've changed too many times, and people are all over the place. But how much do you think people have been too cautious in America to deal with the true risk of singing? Or would it be more helpful if there was a more federal approach? Or do you think it's been good that each region, each state, each city has had its own rules? I don't know. Maybe it's too difficult a question to ask.
Such a vast country, and conditions are different in different places. It does seem appropriate to me that it's more localized. Generally, my feeling is that, although we're all getting a little tired of it in some ways. It is a deadly disease, and singing is definitely, I mean, you can read 20 different reports on the effects of singing and how dangerous it is or not dangerous, and get 20 different answers. But surely it's something that we should be cautious with. I feel that generally it's been the restrictions have been appropriate.
I live in a city where 1 in 10 employees is a lawyer, so I'll just leave that there.
Listen, as we move towards the end, let's go around the panel. Is there something you're going to take away from this last sort of 7-8 months, which is going to really, where are you going to put your energy? Where will your energy be this time next year? What gives you hope for the future? What is it that has actually inspired you through these last 7 or 8 months? Should we go around again in alphabetical order? Scott?
Sure. Again, with my program in its infancy compared to certainly Mike's and Jeremy's, and I'm a few years behind Robert's program, I'm actually quite encouraged. Robert made a comment earlier about some of the younger choristers progressing at an impressive clip during this time. And I've had the same thing because we've been forced to go into this one-on-one or one-on-two, whatever, small group situation. I do think that my choristers are growing much faster right now than they would have done otherwise. So again, I suppose I'm, of the 4 programs represented here, I'm in the best position as far as what the future holds. I'm not concerned so much about what I'm losing right now. I'm thrilled with what I'm gaining. And because we have such dedicated choristers, and because we have such dedicated parents, I'm confident, wholly confident that when we can get everyone back together again to sing as a group, everyone will appreciate it even more than they once did, which was a whole lot, and we'll be on a path for real success. I mean, I had said when I was starting this program three years ago, I had said, it may be 5-8 years before it starts to get to a level that it may take that long to build sort of the foundation of the program. And if anything, I think for us, this will speed up that timeline in some ways. So I may be the only one here who's that optimistic, but I really am. I think in the end, it won't be a huge blow to our program, and I'm confident and very hopeful that it will, in fact, will come out the other side stronger than we entered this thing.
Thank you, Scott. Jeremy, is there something in this last 7 months that actually has encouraged you and you're looking forward to the future? Where do you want to be in a year's time, ideally?
It's hard to be really optimistic and ambitious, I have to say, at this time. My ambitions are pretty limited to getting children back singing. Because I'm very conscious of what we've lost in this program that people see from afar is kind of set in stone. St. Thomas Choir, which I've been incredibly honored and privileged to inherit, has been this extraordinary paradigm in some ways, with all the recordings of Jerry Hancock and John Scott and so on. I mean, some pretty intimidating shoes in which I've found myself. And so my ambition is simply to try and keep this thing running. It's difficult with a boarding community because, of course, it means people being confident enough to send their children back to New York 24/7, essentially. we don't have, of course, a day school program where we could dip in for a week and dip out for another week and so on, and work in cohorts. The nature of this program is either all in or it's all out. And at the moment we're all out. And what I want to try and be is my optimism is just trying to be as creative to get some sort of boys singing back, so we can maintain the health that it once was. This is not set in stone. This is not a given. It's as fragile as any other program. And you know, my ambition is really limited to trying to restore that ability for the boys to experience what they were having before we had to lock down. So
thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Mike. What about you?
Yeah, I think it's the challenge of actually bringing kids back together again to recreate the experience they had 6 months ago, 7 months ago is difficult. My goal is a slightly longer game, and at the risk of sounding flowery, which is not really my style, I really do believe in the beauty of innocence. And I think where we are right now as a country, the fact that our kids are not singing is a tremendous loss to this country in our work, in our missional work. And I'm sorry we are not present when a country really does need us and will need us, I think, for some months to come at a very special time in our country's history. And that gives me actually quite a lot of confidence, as long as we make sure that visibility of what we do and our work is something I think we have to, as we have become invisible, we need to make sure we are very visible as we come out of the other side of this, because I think there will be a tremendous relief at the opportunity, not for kids just to leave their homes, but after all this time, in some respects, whether they know it or not, there's an element of soul searching that even the youngest kid is going through right now, because it's not normal. I do think this will be something on the other side of COVID that, as long as we are active and nimble in making sure that our work is here and the experience and the richness of it is available, I feel optimistic. But it's demoralizing, but I do feel optimistic that this could be a tremendous opportunity for our work.
Thank you, Michael. Robert?
I think because in many ways my circumstances here are similar to Scott's, I have a similar point of view, and I have been grateful to see the continued engagement of children and families. If they had fallen away in large numbers, I would be far more concerned about the future. But it has shown that to the families who are involved here, that it's an important part of their lives and an important part of our parish life. And ultimately, we hope beyond that. So I am encouraged that it will mean all the more when we get back to it. Now, no doubt, some of us have considerable challenges, and everyone who is facing that is in my prayers. But you know, I feel I certainly like to think I won't take it for granted anymore. I don't think I ever did, but you know, I might have moaned, you know, on a rainy Thursday afternoon about having to do another rehearsal. But you know, at the moment, it doesn't seem like I'll ever do that again. So I think it will be all the more beautiful when it really comes back. But we just have to hold it, keep it visible, as I think Mike said, that it's out there and it's important.
Thank you very much, Robert. Erica?
The thing that gives me hope, this might seem a little bit silly, but when we did our summer arts camp on Zoom, so this was for kids ages 3 to 7 on Zoom singing. We didn't have one Zoom malfunction the whole time we did it. The 3-year-olds were completely self-possessed on Zoom. They would sort of, when they wanted to talk, they would like lean forward and you could see their little hand go unmute, and then they would talk and then they would mute. We never had to correct any of them. We never had to mute any of them. And I thought, wow, I mean, children are really resilient. You know, they really have the capacity to be incredibly sponge-like in what they can learn. And I think with our attention and support and love, they can really, I don't know, show us this incredible way to be in this time. And God is moving in their lives, and I don't think that's going to stop. So I'm counting on that to help us continue to teach them and to learn from them.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you all very much for joining us today. For those of you who have been taking part in this webinar, and those of you who are watching the recording, it's quite clear to me that, and I've always believed it since I was a chorister myself, I realized how much singing completely changed my life as a young 8-year-old. I was trying to find a quote of Vaughan Williams, but I can't find it. But I know Vaughan Williams used to talk about how important it was. He was on the original panel that created the first English hymnal. And he wrote in the preface, and it's always worth reading that preface. I read it many times when I was listening to a boring sermon when I was a chorister. But he talks in it about how important it was in writing the hymnal, not only just to fill it with plain song, which he was worried would disappear out of the English vocabulary, if that's the right word to use, but as Scott was saying, you know, the hymnals are very useful, and therefore it would be filled with folk songs from England and Scotland and Wales and Ireland, because he said these melodies are part of the history, the culture, and the communities that they were formed. But the thing I remember was that Vaughan Williams saying something about, and how do you learn a folk song? Someone has to sing it to you. And I love that idea that the songs, the melodies, the story is passed on, and that can only be done by experience. So pay tribute to all of you, to our 4 beautiful musicians here, and the work that you play in the Episcopal Church, and the inspiration, and Mother Takacs, and the inspiration that you bring in the belief that children and choristers are truly ministers with us as priests. So thank you all very much. Thank you very much, Joe, for hosting this recording. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all.